Jake Morrison walked into the classroom and felt all eyes turned toward him. Well, not exactly eyes. Some of his classmates had stalks that moved to look at him. Others had crystal surfaces that seemed to glow brighter when they noticed him. A few had large black pools that might have been eyes. But Jake was never quite sure. He was the only human at Kepler Station Academy, and everyone knew it. The other students whispered when he passed in the hallways. They moved their chairs away. When he sat down, some of them even wore what looked like small shields on their belts when he was around. Jake found his usual seat in the back corner of Xenobiology 401. The chair was too small for him. It's made for beings much shorter than his 6 feet. Into it and pulled out his notebook. Trying to ignore the way his classmates kept glancing at him, Professor Zeltar floated into the room. The teacher was an Altarian with long purple tentacles that moved like arms and several eyes on short stalks. Those eyes could look in different directions at the same time, which Jake found both amazing and a little unsettling. "Good morning, class," Professor Zeltar said. His voice came from somewhere in his round body, though Jake had never figured out where exactly. "Today we begin a new unit. We will study the most dangerous predators in our galaxy." Jake's friend Quill made a soft, chiming sound. Quill was a Zephyrian, and his body was made of something that looked like living crystal. When Quill was nervous or excited, he made musical sounds. Right now, those sounds were getting higher and more worried. "Are we going to learn about the Vorthan death eels?" asked Vera, a Moreland student. She breathed through gills on her neck and had to wear a special water mask to survive in the air-filled classroom. Her voice came out bubbly because of the mask. "Or the plasma wasps of Rigel," suggested Nox, clicking his mandibles together. Nox was Vrex, looking somewhat like a giant praying mantis, but with more arms and a much bigger brain. Professor Zeltar S. Tentacles waved, and what Jake had learned was the Altarian version of shaking your head. "No, my students. Today we study something far more terrifying. Today we learn about the apex predators of Sol 3. A hologram appeared in the center of the room. Jake recognized it immediately. It was Earth, his home planet. The blue and green world spun slowly, looking peaceful and beautiful. Little homesick looking at it. "This world," Professor Zeltar continued, "is what we call a death world. The conditions there are so harsh that evolution has created monsters beyond imagination." Jake blinked. Monsters. He thought about his golden retriever buddy, who was probably sleeping on the couch back home right now. Sister, playing soccer in the backyard? He thought about his grandmother's flower garden. None of that seemed very monstrous. "The gravity on this world is crushing," the professor said. "The atmospheric pressure would kill most species instantly. The weather patterns include violent storms that can destroy entire cities, and the radiation from their star causes deadly mutations." Take remembered the tornado that had hit his family's farm when he was 12. It had been scary, sure, but they had rebuilt the barn, and life had gone on. The deadly radiation was just sunshine, and Jake had always enjoyed sunny days. But the real terror, Professor Zeltar said, his voice dropping to a whisper, comes from the creatures that live there. The hologram changed. It showed what Jake recognized as a human silhouette, but it was surrounded by ominous red light, and looked much more threatening than any person Jake had ever met. "These beings," the professor continued, "are the perfect predators. They have forward-facing eyes, which means they evolved to hunt. They have sharp teeth designed for tearing flesh. Their limbs are incredibly strong, capable of breaking bones." With ease, Jake touched his own teeth with his tongue. They seemed pretty normal to him. He looked at his hands, thinking about how he used them to pet Buddy and help his mom with dishes. They didn't feel like bone-breaking weapons. Most terrifying of all, Professor Zeltar went on, they are persistence hunters. This means they will follow their prey for days, even weeks, never stopping, never giving up, until their victim dies of exhaustion. Jake thought about his uncle, who ran marathons. Uncle Pete was pretty determined, but he usually just wanted to finish the race and get a medal. Jake had never seen him hunt anything except for the TV remote. Quill's chiming got even more nervous. "Professor, how do these creatures sleep?" Don't they worry about being attacked by even worse monsters? Ah, excellent question, Professor Zeltar said. These beings are so dangerous that they have no natural predators. They sleep without fear because nothing on their world is brave enough to attack them. Jake almost laughed. He remembered being afraid of the dark when he was little. He remembered hiding under his blankets when he heard strange noises. He remembered his dad checking the closet for monsters before bedtime. If humans had no natural predators, why had he been so scared of imaginary ones? Their world is covered in poisonous plants, the professor continued. The very air they breathe would kill most civilized species, yet these creatures thrive there. They have even learned to consume the toxic plants for nutrition. Jake thought about his mom's vegetable garden. She grew tomatoes and lettuce and carrots. Those weren't poisonous, were they? Although he remembered reading somewhere that some people couldn't eat certain foods. Maybe that was what the professor meant. We will spend the next several weeks studying these incredible predators, Professor Zeltar announced. We will learn about their hunting methods, their pack behavior, their remarkable ability to survive in conditions that would kill any rational being. The class made various sounds of interest and fear. Quill's chiming was now so high-pitched, it was almost painful to hear. Vera's gills were fluttering rapidly. Knox's mandibles were clicking so fast they sounded like a machine gun. Jake looked around at his classmates and felt a strange mix of emotions. They were talking about humans like they were some kind of movie monsters. But they were also talking about his family, his friends, his neighbors. Mrs. Johnson, who brought cookies to the school bake sale. Mr. Williams, who helped everyone fix their cars. His little sister Amy, who cried when she stepped on a bug by accident. As the class ended and students began filing out, Jake heard them whispering to each other. Can you imagine living on a world with those things? I heard they can run for hours without stopping. My cousin's friend saw one once. She said it was the most terrifying experience of her life. Jake gathered his books and headed for the door. Tomorrow. Professor Zeltar would probably tell them more about the monsters of Earth. Jake wondered what his classmates would think. If they knew they were sitting next to one of those monsters every day. He walked out into the hallway, past the other students who moved aside to let him pass. Jake Morrison, the exchange student from the peaceful farming community of Colorado, was apparently one of the most dangerous predators in the galaxy. He couldn't wait to call home and tell his family about that. Professor Zeltar announced the practical exercise on a Wednesday morning. Jake noticed that his desk had been moved even further from the others. Now there was almost half the classroom between him and his nearest classmate. The empty space felt strange and lonely. Today we will test your understanding, Professor Zeltar said, his tentacles waving with enthusiasm. I will present you with Deathworld survival scenarios. You must design strategies to survive encounters with the apex predators we have been studying. Jake pulled out his notebook, curious to see what his classmates would come up with. Scenario appeared as a hologram in the center of the room. Scenario 1, the professor announced. You are trapped in a burning structure. The human predators are known to enter such dangerous environments. How do you survive? Vera raised her. Finn immediately. Build an underground bunker with fireproof walls and an independent air supply. Excellent thinking, Professor Zeltar said, making a note. Knox's mandibles clicked rapidly as he thought. Deploy aerial drones with thermal sensors to monitor the area. Evacuate to a safe distance of at least 50 kilometers. Very practical, the professor agreed. Quill chimed softly. Create a decoy structure to confuse the predators while escaping through hidden tunnels. Jake listened to his classmates' elaborate plans and felt confused. They were talking about house fires like they were military operations. He remembered when the Martinez family's kitchen had caught fire 2 years ago. His dad had just grabbed the fire extinguisher from their garage and run over to help. Half the neighborhood had shown up with garden hoses and buckets of water. Mrs. Chen had made sandwiches for the firefighters. It had been scary, but also kind of like a community event. Student Morrison, Professor Zeltar said suddenly. What is your survival strategy? Jake looked up, realizing everyone was staring at him. Well, I guess you could just help put out the fire. The classroom fell completely silent. Quill stopped chiming. Vera's gills stopped moving. Nox froze. With his mandibles half open? Help put out the fire? Professor Zeltar repeated slowly. Yeah, Jake said, feeling uncomfortable with all the attention. With water or fire extinguishers, and maybe help people get out safely. You would approach the burning structure? Vera asked, her voice barely a whisper through her water mask. If someone was inside, sure, Jake said. My neighbor. Charlie saved 3 kids from a house fire last year. He just ran in and carried them out one by one. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Several students had activated small personal shields that Jake had never noticed before. They were glowing softly around his classmates like protective bubbles. Professor Zeltar's eye stalks were all focused on Jake now. Your neighbor approached a burning building with human predators inside? Well, they weren't predators, Jake said. They were kids, like 8 and 10 years old, and a baby. Young humans are even more dangerous, Nox whispered. They have not yet learned to hide their predatory instincts. Jake thought about his sister Amy's sleepover party last month, with 6 8-year-old girls giggling over pizza and painting their nails. I don't think kids are more dangerous. They're just kids. Professor Zeltar moved to the next scenario, but Jake noticed his tentacles were trembling slightly. Scenario 2. You encounter a pack of humans in their natural environment. They have noticed your presence. What do? Immediate retreat, said Vera. Maximum distance, maximum speed. Deploy smoke screens and confusion devices, suggested. Nox camouflage technology to become invisible, Quill chimed anxiously. Jake raised his hand. Maybe just say hello. The shields around his classmates glowed brighter. Someone in the back row made a sound like a small scream. Say hello, Professor Zeltar repeated. Yeah, humans are usually friendly, Jake said. If you're lost or need help, most people would be happy to give you directions or call someone for you. Vera's gills were fluttering so fast they looked like hummingbird wings. But what if they see you as prey? Jake scratched his head. I don't think humans generally see other intelligent species as prey. I mean, we eat cows and chickens, but they're not really intelligent like us. You consume other living creatures? Nox asked, his voice rising to a high squeak. Well, yeah, Jake said. Don't most species eat other living things? Plants are alive too. The class stared at him in horror. Jake was starting to realize that maybe his classmates were not just learning about humans in theory. Professor Zeltar presented the third scenario with visibly shaking tentacles. A human approaches you in what appears to be a peaceful manner. It is not showing obvious signs of aggression. What is your response? It's a trap, Vera said immediately. Humans are known for their deceptive hunting techniques. Agreed, Nox added. Peaceful approach followed by sudden violence is classic predator behavior. I would activate all defensive systems and prepare for combat, Quill chimed. Jake felt a growing sense of unease. What if they really are just being peaceful? What if they want to be friends? The word friends caused another wave of panic. Several more students activated their shields. One student in the middle row had quietly moved to sit behind the largest. Desk available? Friends? Professor Zeltar's voice was barely a whisper. You believe these predators capable of friendship? Sure, Jake said. Humans make friends all the time. With other humans, with animals, with anyone who's nice to them. But their pack-bonding instincts, Vera protested. They only bond with their own kind for hunting purposes. Jake thought about his friendship with old Mr. Peterson next door, who was 83 and could barely walk to his mailbox. Not really. Humans are friends with all kinds of people, young, old, different backgrounds. My best friend back home is Maria, and she's from Mexico originally. My other friend Ben is from Korea. We don't hunt together. We mostly just play video games and complain about homework. The room was so quiet Jake could hear the station's life support systems humming. His classmates were staring at him like he had just described something impossible. Professor Zeltar cleared his throat. A sound like water gurgling through pipes. Perhaps we should take a break. As the class filed out, Jake heard whispers following him down the hallway. Did you hear what he said about approaching them peacefully? He thinks they're capable of friendship? How does he know so much about their behavior? Maybe he studied them extensively. But why would anyone want to study such dangerous creatures? Jake walked to his next class, thinking about how strange it was that his classmates found human behavior so terrifying. Everything they described as horrifying sounded completely normal to him. Helping people in emergencies, being friendly to strangers, making friends with different kinds of people. Even eating meat, none of that seemed monstrous. But as he sat down in his next classroom and watched his classmates carefully maintain their distance from him, Jake began to wonder if there was something about humans that he had never really understood. Something that made perfect sense to him, but seemed impossible and frightening to everyone else in the galaxy. He pulled out his notebook and tried to focus on the lesson. His gentle father who helped neighbors with their broken cars. His mother who baked cookies for school fundraisers. His little sister who cried when she accidentally stepped on bugs. Were they really the terrifying monsters his classmates imagined? Or was there something about the galaxy that Jake was only beginning to understand? The next morning, Jake walked into the classroom to find his seat had been moved. It was now in the very back corner, with empty desks all around it. His classmates had created a wide circle of space between themselves and where he would sit. Jake shrugged and settled into his chair, pulling out his notebook. Professor Zeltar floated in with what looked like excitement. His tentacles were moving faster than usual, and his eye stalks were twitching in different directions. Yesterday, we introduced the apex predators of Sol 3, he began. Today, we dive deeper into their hunting methods. The hologram in the center of the room changed to show a human figure running. The image was still surrounded by that ominous red glow that made it look scary. Jake recognized the running form as pretty normal, like someone jogging in the park. Observe. Their primary hunting technique, Professor Zeltar said dramatically, persistence hunting. These creatures can run for hours without stopping. They will follow their prey across vast distances, never losing the trail, never giving up. Jake thought about his high school cross-country team. Coach Martinez had made them run 5 miles every day after school. It had been tough at first. But after a few months, Jake could run that distance without getting too tired. He had never thought of it as hunting, though. Mostly, he just wanted to make the team and impress Sarah Miller, who always came to the meets. Vera raised one of her fin-like hands. Professor, how is this possible? Most intelligent species can only run short distances before exhaustion. Excellent question, the professor replied. These beings have several adaptations that make them perfect endurance hunters. First, they can regulate their body temperature through a process called sweating. They leak water through their skin to cool down. Quill made a disgusted chiming sound. They leak fluids while running. Indeed, Professor Zeltar continued. This allows them to run in conditions that would cause other species to overheat and die. But even more disturbing is their respiratory system. The hologram changed to show human lungs, though they looked much more dramatic and frightening than the pictures in Jake's old biology textbook. These organs can process the toxic atmosphere of their world with incredible efficiency. It can maintain high oxygen intake even during extreme physical activity. Some individuals have been observed running for over 26 standard distance units without stopping. Jake smiled to himself. The professor was talking about marathons like they were some kind of supernatural feat. His uncle Pete had run the Boston Marathon 3 times. Pete always said the hardest part was not the running, but getting up early enough to eat breakfast before the race started. Knox clicked his mandibles nervously. Professor, what happens to their prey during these long chases? The prey animal eventually collapses from exhaustion, Professor Zeltar explained. But here's where these predators show their true intelligence. They do not immediately kill their victim. Instead, they approach slowly, calmly, showing no aggression. Jake remembered helping his dad catch their escaped cow, Bessie, when he was 10. Bessie had broken through the fence and wandered into the neighboring field. Jake and his dad had followed her for about an hour, moving slowly and talking in quiet voices so they wouldn't scare her. When they finally got close enough, Jake had gently put a rope around her neck and led her home. She had seemed more embarrassed than frightened. This calm approach, the professor continued, confuses the prey. The victim expects violence, but instead encounters what appears to be peaceful behavior. This is when the predator strikes. Jake frowned. He and his dad had given Bessie extra hay that night and checked her hooves to make sure she hadn't hurt herself during her adventure. That didn't seem much like striking. The next day, Professor Zeltar focused on human pack behavior. The hologram showed several human silhouettes standing together, still glowing with that menacing red light. These creatures form highly organized social groups, the professor explained. They work together with frightening coordination. Each individual has a specific role in the hunt. Jake thought about his family's yearly camping trips. His dad always set up the tent, his mom planned the meals, his sister gathered firewood, and Jake usually ended up fishing for their dinner. They did work together, but it was more about having fun than being frightening. Most disturbing of all, Professor Zeltar said, lowering his voice, is their pack bonding behavior. These predators will risk their own lives to save other pack members. They show loyalty even to the point of death. Ira's gills fluttered anxiously. But Professor, that behavior sounds almost caring. Do not be fooled, the professor warned. This loyalty makes them even more dangerous. A single human is terrifying enough. But a pack of humans protecting each other is nearly unstoppable. Jake remembered when his neighbor's house had caught fire last winter. Charlie Peterson had run inside 3 times to save the family's pets. Fire department had arrived just as Charlie was carrying out the last cat, his jacket smoking and his face covered in soot. Everyone in the neighborhood had called Charlie a hero, not a terrifying predator. They also displayed disturbing emotional attachments to other species, Professor Zeltar continued. They will adopt and protect creatures that should be their natural prey. Some humans have been observed caring for small mammals, reptiles, and even insects. Jake thought about Buddy sleeping on his bed every night. He thought about his sister's hamster, Mr. Whiskers, who lived in a cage full of toys and treats. He thought about how his grandmother cried when her old cat, Mittens, had died last year. This unpredictable behavior makes them impossible to understand, the professor said. One moment they are efficient killers, the next they are nurturing. Creatures that barely seem dangerous at all. After class, Jake walked to the cafeteria with Quill. His crystal friend was still chiming nervously from the lecture. Jake, Quill said, "Do you think we will ever encounter one of these humans?" Jake almost choked on his water. "Would that scare you?" "Terrify me," Quill admitted, "but also fascinate me. They sound so contradictory. How can something be so dangerous, yet so caring at the same time?" Jake looked at his friend, this gentle being made of living crystal, who helped him with his math homework and always saved him a seat at lunch. "Maybe they're not as scary as they sound," Jake said carefully. "Maybe. They're just trying to survive, like everyone else." Quill's chiming became thoughtful. "Perhaps. But I still hope I never meet one." "Can you imagine trying to sleep knowing such creatures existed on your world?" Jake finished his lunch, thinking about his comfortable bed back home with Buddy curled up at his feet and his family safe in the rooms nearby. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I can imagine." That night, Jake called home. His little sister Amy answered the phone, chattering excitedly about her soccer game and the stray kitten she was trying to convince their parents to let her keep. As Jake listened to her talk, he wondered what his classmates would think if they could see her now. This 8-year-old girl who collected stuffed animals and cried during sad movies was apparently one of the galaxy's most feared predators. The thought made Jake smile, even as he realized tomorrow would bring another day of learning about the monsters he called family. The next day, Jake walked into the classroom to find it had been completely rearranged. His desk was now behind a thick, transparent barrier that hummed with energy. His classmates sat much further away than before, some wearing what looked like full protective gear. Professor Zeltar had positioned himself near the exit. "Today we discuss intelligence and problem-solving abilities," Professor Zeltar announced, his voice slightly muffled by what appeared to be a personal force field. "These creatures possess cognitive abilities that rival our own." Jake settled into his chair behind the barrier, feeling more isolated than ever. The energy field made everything sound distant and strange. Human intelligence is particularly dangerous because it combines analytical thinking with emotional drives, the professor continued. They can plan complex strategies while being motivated by seemingly irrational attachments. The hologram showed a human brain, glowing ominously red like everything else in these presentations. Jake thought it looked pretty much like the pictures in his high school biology book, just more dramatic. But perhaps most disturbing, Professor Zeltar said, is their ability to adapt to any environment. Place a human in any situation, and it will find a way to not just survive, but thrive. Knox raised one of his arm appendages. Psst. Professor, how? Do we identify a human if we encounter one? Are there warning signs? Jake perked up. This seemed like an important question. Excellent inquiry, Professor Zeltar replied. Humans are remarkably good at disguising their true nature. They often appear friendly and helpful. This is part of their hunting strategy. But surely there must be physical indicators, Vera, said her gills fluttering nervously. Indeed, the professor said, humans are typically tall by galactic standards, with forward-facing predator eyes. They have opposable digits for gripping weapons or prey. Their skin lacks protective scales, or natural armor, which indicates they evolved as apex predators with no natural enemies. Jake looked down at his hands, flexing his fingers. He had never thought of them as weapon-gripping appendages. Mostly he used them for typing, playing guitar, and scratching Buddy behind the ears. They also display unusual hair patterns, Professor, Zeltar continued, often on their heads and faces. They show their teeth when they are pleased, which most species find deeply unsettling. Jake touched his hair and thought about his morning smile in the mirror. He had never considered that showing teeth might be scary to other species. Quill's chiming was higher and more worried than Jake had ever heard it. Professor, what if a human has infiltrated civilized space? What if one was living among us without us knowing? The classroom fell silent. Jake felt his heart start beating faster. An interesting theoretical question, Professor Zeltar said slowly. I suppose such a creature would study our behavior, learn our weaknesses, perhaps even gain our trust before revealing its true nature. It would probably ask a lot of questions about our biology and culture, Vera added. And it might pretend to be friendly? Knox suggested. Maybe even helpful to lower our defenses. Jake thought about all the times he had helped his classmates. Carrying Vera's heavy books when her water-breathing equipment made movement difficult, helping Knox reach high shelves with his extra height, sharing his lunch with Quill when his friend forgot to bring food crystals. But how would we know for certain? Quill asked, his chiming now almost panicked. Professor Zeltar's tentacles writhed thoughtfully. I believe the only way to be absolutely certain would be to ask directly. But of course, no human would ever admit to being what it truly is. Jake's heart was pounding now. The conversation was getting too close to the truth. He raised his hand. Before he could stop himself, Professor, he said, his voice sounding strange through the barrier, what if you asked someone directly, and they said yes? The classroom temperature seemed to drop by several degrees. Every eye, stalk, and sensor in the room focused on Jake. What did you say, Student Morrison? Professor Zeltar asked quietly. Jake took a deep breath. He was tired of hiding, tired of listening to his friends and family described as monsters. He was tired of sitting behind barriers and watching his classmates treat him like a dangerous animal. I said, what if you asked someone? If they were human and they said yes? Jake repeated, standing up slowly. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours. Several students had frozen completely. Others were quietly reaching for emergency communication devices. That would be, Professor Zeltar said carefully, theoretically impossible. No predator would reveal itself so openly. What if they weren't really a predator? Jake asked. What if they were just a person, like everyone else, who happened to come from Earth? Vera made a small, gasping sound through her water mask. Knox's mandibles had locked in place. Quill had stopped chiming entirely. Student Morrison, Professor Zeltar said, his voice barely audible, are you saying what I think you are saying? Jake looked around at his classmates, these beings who had become his friends over the past months. Quill, who helped him with math homework and always saved him a seat at lunch. Vera, who shared her notes when he missed class and told funny stories about her home planet. Knox, who had patiently taught him how to use the station's computer systems and never made fun of his mistakes. They were all staring at him with expressions of terror and disbelief. My name is Jake Morrison, he said quietly. I was born in Denver, Colorado on Earth. I'm human. The words hung in the air like a bomb that had just exploded. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Nobody made a sound. Then chaos erupted. Emergency. Alarms started blaring. Students scrambled for the exits, stumbling over chairs and each other in their panic. Someone screamed. Several emergency force fields activated at once, creating a maze of glowing barriers throughout the classroom. Professor! Zeltar had gone completely pale, his tentacles frozen in midair. His multiple eyes were all focused on Jake, wide with shock and something that looked like terror. You, the professor whispered, you are one of them. I'm one of me, Jake said, still standing behind his barrier. I'm just Jake. I've been sitting in your class for 3 months. I helped Vera with her physics homework last week. I shared my lunch with Quill yesterday. I'm the same person I was 5 minutes ago. But even as he said it, Jake could see that everything had changed. The way his classmates looked at him. The way Professor Zeltar was backing toward the door. The way emergency personnel were starting to gather outside the classroom. None of it would ever be the same. I never lied to anyone, Jake said, his voice getting stronger. I never pretended to be something I wasn't. You just never asked. Security officers were entering the classroom now, wearing full protective gear and carrying weapons Jake didn't recognize. They were treating him like a dangerous animal that had escaped from a cage. I'm still just Jake, he said, more to himself than to anyone else. I'm still just a college student who misses his dog and calls his mom every week. But as the security team surrounded his barrier and began discussing containment procedures, Jake realized that in the eyes of the galaxy, he would never be just Jake again. He was Jake Morrison, the human. Jake Morrison. It's the Deathworld monster who had been hiding among them all along. The worst part was seeing the fear in his friends' eyes. The same friends who had laughed at his jokes and helped him study for exams. They were looking at him like they had never really known him at all. Maybe, Jake thought, as the security team began powering up transport equipment, they were right. Jake spent 3 days in what the station called protective custody, but what felt more like a comfortable prison. His room had everything he needed: a bed, a desk, entertainment systems, even Earth food from the cafeteria. But he couldn't leave, and no one would visit him. On the 4th day, there was a soft knock on his door. Jake looked up from his homework to see Quill standing in the doorway, chiming very quietly. His crystal body was dimmer than usual, which Jake had learned meant he was nervous or sad. Can I come in? Quill asked. Jake nodded, surprised and happy to see his friend. Of course. Quill moved slowly into the room, staying near the door. I wanted to apologize, he said. I ran away when you told us the truth. That was not very brave of me. You were scared, Jake said. I understand. I've been thinking for 3 days, Quill continued. You are the same person who helped me with calculus. You are the same person who shared your food when I forgot mine. You are the same person who listened when I was homesick. Jake felt relief wash over him. I really am the same person. But you are also human, Quill said, his chiming becoming slightly brighter. And I have been trying to understand how both things can be true. Over the next few days, other classmates began to visit. Vera came next, bringing her water-breathing equipment and a list of questions she had written down. Knox arrived with detailed notes from Professor Zeltar's lectures. Wanting to compare what they had learned with what Jake actually experienced, when Professor Zeltar said humans can run for hours, Vera asked, "Is that really true?" "Some can," Jake said. "My uncle runs marathons, but I get tired after about 20 minutes. My little sister can barely run to the end of our street without stopping to catch her breath." Knox clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. "So not all humans are the same?" "Not at all," Jake said. "We're all different, just like your species are different from each other." "But the professor said you have no natural predators," Vera continued. Jake laughed. "We have lots of things that can hurt us. Bears, sharks, poisonous snakes, diseases, car accidents. My mom is terrified of spiders, and they're tiny." His friends began to look confused. "But you are apex predators," Quill said. "I guess technically, But mostly we just try to avoid dangerous things, Jake explained. Most humans have never hunted anything bigger than a fish. We buy our food at stores. Professor Zeltar finally visited on the 7th day, looked embarrassed, his tentacles drooping and his eye stalks pointing downward. Student Morrison, he said formally, I owe you an apology. You don't have to apologize for being scared, Jake said. I am not apologizing for being frightened, Professor Zeltar replied. I am apologizing for being a terrible teacher. I taught fear instead of understanding. I shared dramatic stories instead of facts. The professor's tentacles straightened a little. I have spent the past week researching actual human culture, not just your physical capabilities. I discovered that my sources were incomplete. What did you find? Jake asked. I found poetry, Professor Zeltar said, sounding surprised. Music, art, stories about friendship and love and kindness. I found records of humans saving other species, even at great cost to themselves. I found evidence of the same gentle behaviors you have shown us every day. Jake smiled. We're not perfect, but most humans try to be good. I would like to ask a favor, Professor Zeltar continued. Would you consider giving a guest lecture to the class to teach us what humans are really like? Word spread quickly through the station. By the time Jake's lecture was scheduled, they had to move it to the largest auditorium. Students from other schools attended via video link. Even some professors and station administrators came to listen. Jake stood at the front of the room, looking out at hundreds of curious faces, stalks, and optical sensors. He had prepared a presentation, but looking at the crowd, he decided to just talk. Hi everyone, he said. My name is Jake Morrison, and I'm from a small town in Colorado on Earth. I'm here to tell you about humans, but not the scary version. You might have heard, click to his first slide, a picture of his family standing in front of their farmhouse. His parents were smiling, his sister was making a silly face, and Buddy was trying to steal a sandwich from the picnic table behind them. These are humans, Jake said. My mom teaches elementary school. My dad fixes tractors. My sister plays soccer and collects stickers. They're not monsters. He showed pictures of his hometown, his friends, his school. He talked about human children who were afraid of the dark, about elderly humans who fed birds in the park, about teenagers who worried about homework and dating. Humans do come from a dangerous planet, Jake explained. And yes, that made us tough. But it also taught us to take care of each other. When there are hurricanes or earthquakes or fires, humans help each other. We share food, we rebuild homes, we take care of the injured. He showed videos of rescue workers saving people from disasters, of doctors treating patients, of teachers helping students learn. We do eat meat, Jake continued, but so do lots of species. We do hunt sometimes, but mostly for food or to protect crops. We're not hunting other intelligent beings. A student in the front row raised a tentacle. But what about the persistence hunting? The never giving up? Jake grinned. That's true, but we mostly use it for good things now. Like my friend who spent 2 years trying to ask a girl to prom, or my neighbor who kept trying to fix his car even though he's terrible at mechanics, or my grandmother who called the same government office every day for 6 months until they fixed the pothole in front of her house. As the audience laughed, a mixture of sounds that was actually quite beautiful. Humans are persistent, Jake said. But usually we're persistent about helping people, or learning new things, or making life better. By the end of his presentation, the questions had changed from fearful to curious. Students wanted to know about human art, human food, human holidays. They asked about friendship and families and what it was like to have pets. Professor Zeltar stood up during the question period. I've spent my career teaching about dangerous species, he said, but I realize now that I never taught the most important lesson. What's that? Jake asked. That being dangerous and being good are not opposites, the professor replied. Humans are indeed formidable, but you use that strength to protect rather than to harm. You are dangerous to those who would hurt your friends, your family, your pack, but you are gentle with those you care about. As the presentation ended and students began filing out, many stopped to thank Jake or ask more questions. Quill, Vera, and Nox waited for him near the stage. "So," Vera asked, "are we still friends, even though you're a terrifying death world monster?" Jake laughed. "Are you still my friend, even though you know what I am now?" "Especially because we know what you are," Nox said, clicking his mandibles in what Jake had learned was the Vrex equivalent of a smile as they walked back to the dormitories together. Jake felt lighter than he had in weeks. He was still human, still from Earth, still technically one of the galaxy's apex predators. But he was also still Jake Morrison, college student, who missed his dog and called his mom every week, and for the first time since arriving at the academy, that felt like exactly who he was supposed to be. The next semester, Professor Zeltar's course was renamed from Apex Predators of Death Worlds to Understanding Survival Adaptations, and Jake Morrison became the first human teaching assistant in galactic academic history. It's helping other students learn that sometimes the most dangerous thing about a species is how much they're willing to sacrifice to protect the people they love.